You wake up at 6, not because you want to, because the day has already started without your permission. There is a text from your mother's doctor about a prescription change that needs your authorization. There is a message from your daughter's school about a form that was due yesterday. There is a work email marked urgent that arrived at 11 the night before and is still sitting unanswered because by 11 the night before, you were already unconscious on the couch with your shoes still on. You make breakfast. You check the calendar. You drive someone somewhere. You call the pharmacy. You answer the work email in a parking lot. You make a mental note to call your father tonight because he sounded different on the phone last week, and you have not been able to stop thinking about what that difference might mean. You eat lunch, standing up. You sit through a meeting while tracking a separate conversation on your phone about your mother's mobility. You pick someone up. You cook dinner. You help with homework. You return the call to your father and spend 40 minutes listening to the same story he told you 3 days ago. And you do not mention that, because what would be the point? You clean the kitchen. You set the alarm. You lie in bed and something in your chest does not release. You are not awake. You are not asleep. You are suspended somewhere between the two, your body exhausted and your mind still running the calculations it never finishes. And tomorrow you will do it again, not because you chose this life in any single moment, but because this life assembled itself around you one obligation at a time until stepping out of any piece of it became unthinkable. You are the sandwich generation, and you are tired in a way that sleep does not fix. The term sandwich generation refers to adults, typically in their 40s and 50s, who are simultaneously responsible for the care of aging parents and the raising of their own children. But the term itself is misleading in its neatness. It implies two clean layers pressing against a stable center. The reality is less a sandwich and more a compression, a slow and relentless narrowing of space, physical space, emotional space, financial space, psychological space, the space between who you are and what you are required to be getting thinner every year until the person in the middle can barely distinguish between the two. This is not a lifestyle choice. It is a demographic inevitability that arrived at the intersection of several historical forces. Parents are living longer than any previous generation, often with chronic conditions that require sustained involvement over years rather than months. Children are remaining financially and emotionally dependent longer, navigating an economy that delays traditional milestones like stable employment, housing, and independence. And the generation in the middle entered adulthood during a period of economic instability that compressed their own timeline. Mortgages arrived later, savings accumulated slower, careers stabilized later. And by the time they found their footing, the demands from both directions had already begun. What makes this generation different from previous caregiving generations is not the existence of responsibility. Every generation has cared for its elderly and its young. What is different is the simultaneity, the compression of both demands into the same years, the same budget, the same body, the same nervous system. Previous generations typically experienced these demands sequentially. You raised your children. They left. Then, years later, your parents needed care. The gap between those two phases provided recovery, space to reorganize, time to replenish what the first phase had spent. That gap has collapsed, and its collapse has created a psychological burden that the structures of modern life were never designed to support. To understand why the sandwich generation is so exhausted, you have to understand what is happening inside the nervous system of a person managing simultaneous caregiving in two directions. The human stress response was designed for acute challenges. A threat appears. The system mobilizes, the threat passes, the system recovers. This cycle of activation and recovery is fundamental to how the nervous system maintains its health. Without recovery, the system does not reset. It remains elevated. And when it remains elevated for long enough, the elevation stops being a response and becomes a baseline. The body forgets what rest feels like, not because rest is unavailable, but because the system no longer recognizes it as safe. For the sandwich generation, the stressors are not acute. They are chronic. They do not arrive as single events that can be resolved and released. They arrive as ongoing conditions. A parent whose health is declining is not a problem to be solved. It is a reality to be managed indefinitely, with no clear endpoint and no moment where the body can safely stand down. A child who needs guidance, support, presence, and resources is not a project that concludes. It is a commitment that shifts shape daily, but never lives. When these two chronic stressors overlap, the nervous system enters a state that psychologists describe as allostatic overload. The total demand on the system exceeds its capacity for recovery, and in that state something specific begins to happen. The body does not collapse all at once. It erodes. Sleep deteriorates. Immune function declines. Emotional regulation becomes brittle. The capacity for patience, creativity, and presence, the very qualities that caregiving demands the most, are the first to be consumed by the overload. And the person in the middle, whose entire role depends on being steady, is slowly losing the ability to be steady from the inside out. This is the biological reality beneath the exhaustion. Not laziness, not poor time management, not a failure of gratitude. A nervous system that has been running in emergency mode for so long that it no longer knows how to do anything else. And the insidious part is that the person living inside this overload often does not recognize it as overload, because it arrived so gradually, because each individual demand taken on its own was manageable, because there was never a single day where the load crossed from bearable to unbearable. It simply accumulated. One more appointment, one more school event, one more phone call from the doctor, one more late night reviewing insurance forms, one more weekend spent driving between the house you were raising your family in and the house your parents can barely maintain. Each addition felt small, but the total, the sum of all those small additions stacked on top of each other across months and years, is a weight that no reasonable assessment would call sustainable. And yet, here you are, sustaining it, because the alternative is not something your conscience can live with. One of the most psychologically damaging aspects of the sandwich position is the impossibility of full presence. You are always partially somewhere else. Sitting with your children, part of your mind is calculating your parents' next appointment. Visiting your parent, part of your mind is worrying about what your child is going through at school. At work, both threads run simultaneously beneath every task, every conversation, every meeting. You are never fully anywhere because everywhere needs you at the same time. This divided attention is not just stressful, it is grief-inducing. Because the person in the sandwich is acutely aware that they are not giving anyone the fullness of their presence. They know their children deserve more. They know their parents deserve more. They know their partner deserves more. They know their own body and mind deserve more. And the gap between what they want to give and what they are actually able to give becomes a source of quiet, persistent shame that rarely gets spoken about, because there is no time to speak about it. The shame itself is added to the list of things that will be processed later, and later never arrives. And the cruelest dimension of this divided attention is that the people on either end of the sandwich often do not see each other's claim on you. Your parents do not fully grasp how much your children require. Your children cannot comprehend the weight of what your parents need. Each side experiences your divided attention as insufficient attention, and each side, without meaning to, communicates a version of the same message. You are not doing enough. That message arrives from both directions simultaneously, and the person in the middle absorbs both versions and carries them as personal failure, not because either assessment is fair, but because the nervous system, already running at capacity, does not have the resources to challenge the narrative. It simply accepts it, files it alongside the guilt, and keeps moving. This is where the sandwich generation differs from every other form of exhaustion. It is not just the volume of what they carry. It is the impossibility of putting any of it down. A person overwhelmed by work can theoretically quit. A person overwhelmed by a relationship can theoretically leave. But a person overwhelmed by the simultaneous needs of their aging parent and their growing child cannot step away from either without something essential collapsing. The obligations are not optional. They are biological. They are moral. They are woven into the deepest structures of love and duty. And the person carrying them knows, with absolute clarity, that no one else is going to step in and carry them instead. There is a specific emotional experience that belongs almost exclusively to the sandwich generation. The experience of watching time move in two opposite directions at once. Your children are becoming. Every week they are more capable, more independent, more themselves. Their trajectory is upward, outward, forward. And watching that trajectory is one of the deepest joys available to a human being. But at the same time, your parents are diminishing. Every visit reveals something smaller. A little less memory, a little less mobility, a little less of the person who used to fill the room. Their trajectory is inward, downward, toward an ending that cannot be negotiated. Holding both of these realities simultaneously does something to the psyche that is almost never acknowledged. You are experiencing creation and loss at the same time, hope and grief in the same body, the future opening in front of you through your children while it is closing behind you through your parents. And there is no psychological framework that prepares a person for this simultaneity. There is no compartment in the mind designed to hold joy and mourning in equal measure without one contaminating the other. So they bleed together. You cry at your daughter's graduation and you are not entirely sure which emotion is producing the tears. You feel a surge of pride watching your son navigate his first challenge and immediately think of your father, who can no longer navigate his own hallway. The two experiences become entangled, and the entanglement is exhausting, not because either feeling is wrong, but because holding both at once requires a psychological capacity that no one was designed to sustain indefinitely. And there are moments, small and private and almost never shared, where the two timelines collide so directly that they produce something indescribable. You are teaching your child to drive, and you remember your father teaching you. You are helping your mother remember a name, and you hear your daughter learning a new one. You are holding the hand of someone who is arriving and the hand of someone who is leaving, and both hands need you to be strong, and both hands are pulling you in opposite directions, and there is only one of you, one body, one heart, one nervous system trying to hold what two could barely manage. There is a loneliness at the center of the sandwich that is structurally invisible, because the person in the middle is never alone. Their calendar is full. Their phone is active. Their house is occupied. They are surrounded by people who need them at every hour of the day. And yet the loneliness persists because none of those relationships are currently flowing in their direction. The parent needs comfort. The child needs guidance. The partner needs patience. The employer needs performance. And the person providing all of it is standing at the center of a web of demand with no one on the other end asking, "What do you need?" Not because the people around them are selfish, but because the system is organized around the assumption that this person is fine, that they are handling it, that their steadiness is structural rather than performed. This is the loneliness of the load-bearing wall. You are the part of the building that holds everything up. Everyone depends on your strength, and no one thinks to ask whether the wall is tired, whether it has cracks, whether it needs reinforcement. Because the moment the wall shows weakness, the entire structure feels unstable. So the wall stays upright, quietly, indefinitely, carrying weight it was never designed to carry alone, and hoping, without ever saying it out loud, that someone will eventually notice it is shaking. There is one more cost that the sandwich generation carries, and it may be the most invisible of all: the loss of self. Not in the dramatic sense, not a breakdown or an identity crisis. Something quieter. The slow and steady disappearance of the person who exists outside of their roles. You used to read. You used to walk without purpose. You used to have thoughts that were not about logistics. You used to lie in bed on a Saturday morning and think about nothing, and that nothing felt like something. It felt like you. But the roles consume that space. Parent, child of aging parents, employee, partner, coordinator, financial planner, emotional manager, medical advocate, each role legitimate, each role necessary, and each role taking a piece of the space where selfhood used to live, until one day you realize that you cannot remember the last time you did something purely because you wanted to. Not because it needed doing, not because someone else required it, just because the desire existed and you had the room to follow it. This loss does not register as dramatic. It registers as numbness, a flatness where curiosity used to be, a mechanical quality to the days that you might mistake for maturity, but that is actually depletion. You are not becoming less interesting. You are becoming less available to yourself. And the cruelest part is that the life you are living, the one organized entirely around the needs of others, receives the world's highest praise. You are such a good parent. You are so devoted to your mother. You handle everything so well. These compliments land on a person who is quietly disappearing inside, the very devotion being celebrated. And if you try to name this disappearance, if you try to say, "I feel like I have lost myself somewhere inside all of this," the response is almost always the same. You are doing great. It will get easier. Hang in there. These are not bad responses. They are simply insufficient ones. Because what the person needs is not encouragement. It is acknowledgement. The acknowledgement that what they are experiencing is not a rough patch. It is a structural condition, one that will not resolve on its own, one that requires more than endurance, one that demands the thing the sandwich generation is least practiced at providing for themselves: permission to matter. Not as a function, as a person. This is not a story about a generation that failed to plan. It is a story about a generation that arrived at a specific intersection of demographic, economic, and cultural forces and found itself holding more than any single human being was designed to carry. The parents who are living longer, the children who need more, the economy that gave less, the workplace that demanded everything, the culture that celebrated self-sacrifice and then looked away when the self being sacrificed started to show the cost. None of these forces were chosen. None of them were anticipated. and none of them came with instructions for how to survive the convergence. The sandwich generation did not sign up for this position. They were born into a timeline that placed them at the exact center of pressures that previous generations experienced in sequence. And they are holding that center together through sheer force of will, not because they are invincible, but because the people on either side of them cannot afford for them to stop. If you are in this position, there is nothing wrong with how tired you feel. You are not failing at life. You are carrying two lives inside your own. And the exhaustion you feel is not a sign of weakness. It is the honest signal of a nervous system that has been operating beyond capacity for longer than it was ever designed to sustain. You do not need to be told to take care of yourself. You have heard that. What you need is for someone to look at what you are actually carrying and say out loud what no one says. This is too much for one person. And the fact that you are doing it does not mean it is sustainable. It means you are extraordinary. And it means you deserve more help than you are getting, more rest than you are taking, more acknowledgement than you are receiving, and more room than you are allowing yourself to simply exist as a person and not as a function. If this described your life, you are not alone in it. This channel is a space for the patterns that shape us deeply, but rarely get named. If this meant something to you, consider subscribing so these conversations continue to find you. And if you want, leave something in the comments. Even just a sentence. Because sometimes the most exhausted people in the world just need to hear someone say, "I see what you are carrying, and it is real." Thank you for watching.